moon relationship as well. You can lace that over the Vitruvian Man. It's a good thing to talk about because it's depicting a 5-star formation, right? So clearly Da Vinci is saying that this is important to man. This form of mathematics, what I'm trying to show you in this formation is important to man. So if you don't mind, go a little bit deeper into that connection and what it means to us.
I can show you. Hold on one second. So here's the Vitruvian Man. It just so happens that this is a copy that I made a bit larger than its scale. But I have a small scale drawing of Vitruvian Man. And I had never looked at the proportional dimensions of it in inches. I'd always looked at it in millimeters because, you know, we're taught that millimeter is more exact somehow. And in the day of Da Vinci, the major use of measurement system at the time was inches and feet, okay? And they had also something else called brachios, which is palms, like you can use measurements of palms as well. But Da Vinci, the major use during the Renaissance period was inches. Now, interesting, radius, when I measured the original scale drawing, the radius of the circle Da Vinci drew from the navel, which is the center, to the edge of the circle is 4.32 inches exactly. So I looked at that and I thought, geez, that's kind of amazing. Secondly, I realized last year that this finger here from the center, navel point, right? The center of the square is at the groin. The center of the circle is at the navel point. But if you take measurement from the navel point up to this point right here and use 360 degrees as the top right here, this is exactly 51.84 degrees. 51.84 degrees is the slope angle of the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait a minute, 4.32, that means that its diameter is 864, you know, or 8.64 inches. And the sun's diameter is 864,000 miles. And interestingly, we have 86,400 seconds in one day. And so everyone looks at Da Vinci and says, wait a minute, this guy somehow could time travel, right? Because things in the future, I mean, he has a drawing of a bicycle that looks like a drawing of a bicycle that you would see in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Annie. So how was he able to tap into so much knowledge? And I believe it's because our perception of time, that it's this monodimensional one-way street perspective, is limited perspective on time. Extremely limited perspective on time. And that there's really only now. If you watch Alan Watts' videos on YouTube or listen to Alan Watts, he talks about time quite a lot and how there's only really the eternal now. We block off different perspectives, just as we have blocked off different perspectives of ourself and put it into denial mode, right? We've done the same thing with different dimensions of time. So it is us, by our own choosing, that chooses to see things the way we see them. You know, we don't see the world around us as the world truly is. We see the world around us as we are. And that is just a fact. You can't separate the observer from the observation. You can't separate the bias, right, from whatever the experiment is when you're observing it. So this is just a fact of quantum mechanics. Heisenberg's is certainly real. So I think what's happened is that Pythagoras, who was also, I believe, Da Vinci, and many other characters through many lifetimes would encrypt and leave information for himself and for the world at that time. And that those things became Rosicrucianism. So the year that Da Vinci was born, for example, in 1452, there was something unique that happened in the world. This was at the time period of the Ottoman Empire, the separation of the Catholic Church into an Eastern and Western Empire in Rome and Constantinople. You might remember this from history class. Well, what happened was the Vatican decided to release thousands of Hermetic texts that they had in the Vatican Library in 1452. And you can look this up on the internet. You can find lots of information about this. A lot of those texts ended up in the hands of the family that were the ruling class family over the city of Florence, right? Which is where Da Vinci, it's close to where Vinci is, where Da Vinci was from, okay? And so this family, the Medici family, had control of a lot of these Hermetic texts. And Da Vinci had access to these Hermetic texts. And I'm talking about the same ones like you listened to, right, with the Emerald Tablets. As above, so law of correspondence, polarity, all of these things Da Vinci understood. These are all the basis of Rosicrucianism, as well as the things that you would find in Freemasonry and Kabbalah, right? Because Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. It's the mystical side or Hermetic aspects of Judaism. So basically, what I believe is that mankind goes through different levels of consciousness, through different periods of time, because we're on a cycle. Indians and Hindus believe. And that cycle is 432,000 years and 216,000 years and 25,920 years. And you'll notice all of those numbers sum to 9. So 4 plus 3 plus 2 equals 9. All geometry will always sum to 9. A pentagon, sum of angles, is 540 degrees. 5 plus 4 equals 9. A hexagon is 720. 7 plus 2 0 equals 9. An octagon is 1080. 1 plus 8 plus 0 plus 0 9.
With digital root 9.
Without. So I believe that Da Vinci and the Rosicrucians all left this as encrypted information to find when the world goes through the cycle that it needs to go through. And clearly we are there now. So this was left as information for us to help raise consciousness so we can find it, right? Now, even if they had lived in prior lifetimes, even you cannot ascend, right? If you kind of understand this fully, there's no way you can ascend without pulling everyone with you, because we refer to the universe as the universe, but actually it's the U-inverse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you just touched on a major point there that ties really the last half an hour of what we just discussed together, right? Because you touched on language, the fact that you speak 8 languages and that you found a way of really being able to take on board new languages quite easy, basically pattern recognition, right? And that enabled you, and with your mathematical mind, seeing geometry the way that you see geometry. And what I found quite interesting when I started to really, I guess, plug in and start receiving my own downloads, which I'd love to talk about, the challenges of that a little bit later on in this conversation. I went from looking at I was doing consciousness mapping in financial markets. Right? I had a crazy theory that Fibonacci sequences and Fibonacci waves is such an elementary way of viewing charts, markets, equities, etc., that there was a much deeper connection. And I just went through a very crazy period of having numbers all over the walls. And I was making some pretty significant mathematical breakthroughs, which then led towards me discovering something pretty significant inside of Bitcoin. But in the in-between stage of, I guess, staying focused on what my business objective was meant to be, you go in all of these different areas, right? And one of those for me was I started to look into hieroglyphics. I started to look into text and utilizing mathematics in order to reveal text that otherwise you might not have been able to see, right? So, and these are the other things where I really started to understand the power of numbers, that everything is numbers. When I'm reading text, it's numbers. That really started to make me appreciate not only, I guess, the efforts people like Pythagoras, Da Vinci, I'm going to loosely say Shakespeare.
As well, for sure.
Yeah. But if you have tools that allow you to ultimately see the order of what otherwise would seemingly be chaos, then you can start revealing a world of information to you that is there genuinely to be seen, but you have to train yourself to see it, which is why I wanted to start the conversation on the Da Vinci comment, right? And people like me who are aware of this stuff, and I wouldn't consider myself, say, at the beginner stage of the journey. I definitely won't consider myself at the expert or masterful stage of the journey. I'm somewhere in the middle, so I'll just keep on every single day, get a deeper connection with myself, right? But I know enough to understand the amount of dedication as well as significance to the work that you are putting out there. And from us being friends at just on a personal level, I sympathize with you, because in order to hold that high of vibration for the sustained period of time in which you do, I appreciate the challenges of that, which if you would like to share, we could talk about in a minute. But with, I guess, what people would deem to be occult information, right? And occult is a term that gets a bad rap. Occult just literally means hidden information, right? And because it has that stigma, and the things that you're talking on, and the work that you're putting out there is so revealing for those who are willing to see, that I really, this is why I wanted to jump on the conversation with you, for people to really understand and appreciate just how much you're sharing, because it is work like this that enables, like you said, us to have a consciousness vibration rise around the planet, and it's a collective thing. More and more work like this needs to start getting out there, and we need to start having the conversation. So going to the personal side of things, what's been the challenges for you to step into this world of, say, hyperconnectivity, to really source, right, and getting downloads, the first stages of what that was like, and your personal growth and development to not only, say, step back into receiving downloads, but maintain that vibration and deal with it much better and more functionally as individuals, you're navigating this dimension and this reality?
You know, it's funny, because when I first started kind of documenting and all of this work, I think, and I haven't really told this story before in such an open forum, but, you know, in the beginning, like, I remember my wife, Susie, and I would be, you know, we'd have plans for a weekend or something like this. This is probably 7 years ago now. And all of a sudden, like, I couldn't really do anything for a whole weekend, because I'd really be writing down page after page after page of what I was seeing, of advanced physics and stuff that candidly I should not really have been thinking about, but it was literally overtaking my mind. And it would last for about 3 days. And luckily my wife is very, she's very patient with me, because she would know, like, okay, well, you're getting it. And so whatever it is, I'm writing it down. And of course, you know, the difference between someone who's just absolutely a nut job and someone who, you know, might be considered a genius. I joke about this all the time. It's kind of like what between a dirty old man and a charming older gentleman, and say, oh, a few $1 million, right? And in a way, that's kind of true also with genius and insanity, because if you can be successful in life, then people tend to look at that which others might look as an insanity and say, well, gee, that's genius, because, you know, they've somehow made it work. And, you know, I say that in jest, but there's some truth to it, right? And so I used to get it like once every 6-9 weeks or something like that. And I would get kind of overtaken for like 3 or 4 days. And then I would be like, okay, you know, I've been released. Now I can do other things. And searching after I'd write all of it down for, you know, filing patents and such on this work as well, which I filed lots. You know, I filed probably over 60 or so patents during that time frame. But the point is that I used to worry all the time, and I'd say, okay, well, maybe this weekend is going to come up and it's going to be this overtaking experience again. I won't be able to do anything else. And actually, the way that I overcame that is that now it's just all the time. And I got used to that. Instead of kind of setting aside time for it, which was almost like this Jekyll and Hyde period, right? I now just listen to the universe, and it shows up anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Constantly thinking now about things, or allowing them to come in, even when I'm just not thinking about anything else or working on anything else. I will just allow things to come in as messages, because now I realize that the universe is communicating with us. It communicates with all of us. Now, some people can actually get that communication and make something of it, or some people just put it into denial and avoid it altogether because they might get scared that, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy or whatever. Like you said, numbers all over your walls and whatnot, right? You're like, wait, I think I've seen a movie like this before. And the truth is, you're not crazy. You're not just waking up. And I think one of the things that people need to understand, you know, I read a meme the other day that said something like, well, if crazy is, you know, all of these things, you know, what do we call the world we're living in?
Yeah.
You know, is that not crazy? And a certain aspect of me says, geez, you know, I'd much rather be the crazy one if what we're looking at right now in this world that we're living in is what we would call sanity.
Totally. Totally. Now, you gave it a good so I'll talk about my experience, right? Because with where I am at right now, and with my journey, mine wasn't as frequent as 6 to 9 weeks. I'll have up to the age of about 25, I'm 33 now. I'll say I probably had 5 or 6 moments where it was hyper clear. And I just want to try and explain to people what I guess the feeling feels like from my perspective, and the challenges from my perspective that I had to deal with, which if you liken it to, say, you're thinking about something, right? And you are stressing and straining your mind towards a challenge or something that you're just very focused your intent towards. And it seems like almost feels like an impossible task, right? And when you feel plugged in, everything becomes hyper clear. But so much so to the point where you're receiving so much clarity on so many different subject matters that I wouldn't say I didn't have interest in, because they're all related to things that I did have interest in. But there weren't areas that I thought I would task myself with at all. And I didn't really know how to contextualize it. I just thought everyone does this, and clearly everyone can do these things and has experiences like this. But it was when it became very deliberate and I was very aware of what things I was doing that was allowing me to be more connected and start receiving information and channeling information a lot more effectively. For instance, I was quite religiously reciting and studying the Law of One, the Emerald Tablets. I was studying Tesla to no end, Walter Russell. I was really going in. I was also doing studying work with people like Graham Hancock, David Wilcock as well, and more like the ancient history side as well. But I'll say it's more so Thoth, Emerald Tablets, and the Law of One. That was always playing in the background, and I was always thinking about these different mathematical challenges and just different ways of doing things. And it got to a point where about 3 years ago, I woke up, and after having this crazy period of all of these numbers everywhere in the house, I woke up and I said to Lisa, my partner who you've met, I've got an idea of how to build an engine, right? I wasn't just talking about a normal engine. I was talking about a free energy over unity device, and I started drawing it out, and then started going into gravitational control. And it's just for no reason. I was studying financial markets, and then next minute I'm talking about over unity engines and gravitational propulsion, which, funnily enough, fast forward 6 months, I'm in Nassim's lab, and the very things that Nassim's working on were the things that I drew 6 months prior. So again, shows the feedback loop and that we're all interconnected. But when I go into these modes, and when I've been into these modes, that one was quite significant because I found myself being quite difficult to function around others. I needed isolation. I wanted to continuously, with a high degree of obsession, just focus on whatever it is I was doing. I was just very much plugged in. And I think if there's other people out there who have these experiences, you do start questioning yourself, and you do question that fine line between, am I really onto something and stepping into the realm of hyper-intelligence, or am I batshit crazy? Right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at also the stresses it puts on those who are closest to you as you flip in between, am I crazy or am I really onto something? It's those who are closest to you who tend to suffer the most, because at least in my experience, I wasn't that accessible. I was just a very, very, very difficult person to be around, right? And that actually made me fearful of stepping in again, right? Until I became more balanced myself. And this is really, for me, what the last 2 years about my personal growth has been about, is because now I have a very good understanding of how to be plugged in, and what practices and what state of mind I need to get myself into to bring myself into balance, to have a continuous tap. But I knew that myself personally, as an individual, I had growth to do. And there's things that I felt I had to focus on first and grow on first before I can go back to that stage and that period where I can learn in almost like a childlike wonder, right? I do think it does take that. It does take an almost childlike wonder and a way of reconnecting, I guess, with your childhood, in my case, of how we look at things and we push away the distortion. We're just so ready to receive.
Right.
Right. What, I guess, tips you have for people to just balance things a little bit better in that regard, or yeah, just prepare themselves a bit more, because this is something we can all do, right? Tapping into the universal hive mind is something we can all do. So what should people do to prepare themselves?
A couple of things that I think might be helpful to people, because I think a lot of people are going through what you just described. Quite sure. And you know, the real question of insanity to me is like, doing things the same way and expecting different results is what is truly insane. And that's what's wrong with the world right now, candidly, my view on it. But to answer your question, I'd take it back to the analogy that you gave on Superman. So Superman and Clark Kent. Now, the thing is that if you have Superman who knows and acknowledges that he's also Clark Kent, because he is Clark Kent also, he's both. It may be, this is a very good analogy and metaphor for what we're talking about with the masks, right? One is, it's almost like the Jekyll and Hyde relationship, yet again, right? It's like the Wolfman, who all of a sudden, you know, wakes up the next morning covered in blood. He says, I killed again. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So instead of looking at it as, you know, two different characters, look at them instead as one integrated whole. And you yourself are the same way. And your greatest power will come when Superman knows and accepts that he's also Clark Kent. And Clark Kent knows that he's also Superman. The two can work together. Right? The two can then work together. Now, one thing that I think is a very powerful technique to use as well is, you know, we think that our brains are storage devices like hard drives with disks for memory. I reject that notion 100%. I think that our thoughts are non-local to our brain. And I'm to some top neuroscientists who believe the same as I do on this. One of them was Hans Kierstead. He came with Nasimani to meet with the Dalai Lama last October. And thoughts are actually non-local. Think of them more as radio signals. So the brain is more like a tuner of radio signals. The heart is the for tuning. Your heart is what is going to determine your emotional state. If your emotional state is one of joy, elation, and love, the thoughts that come into your mind will be incredibly great thoughts. If your heart is tuned in to lower vibration, you had a stressful day, you're angry because your kids aren't doing what you want them to do, or your job isn't going as you hope it would, then all of a sudden the mind are dark thoughts. Now those can become two different realities. The more you tune your heart into those low vibrations, the more those thoughts will become manifestations around you. In today's world, our thoughts become very rapid manifestations, like very, very rapid manifestations.
Yeah, super tangible.
It's super tangible. It's super now.
Yeah.
So you could be thinking something, and all of a sudden it will manifest right away now. Okay. This is not the way that it was 2 years ago, because the Earth is now in a different position. The solar system's in a different position. We are now solidly in the age of Aquarius.
Okay. That segues very nicely into the next conversation. Quite prematurely, but it segues quite nicely into the next conversation point, because so going to Egypt now, right? Us exploring the pyramids. I'll let you explain as to why we was there and what we're really up to. But there's something I've been pondering since, and it's around because it's quite tied in with Da Vinci's work and the fact that it's not very well documented, was not really documented at all, that Da Vinci went to the pyramids and Da Vinci wrote about the pyramids, but referred to them as, was it Bull Mountains?
Bull Mountain, yep.
Right. And you got the chevrons as well, depicting the relationship with the bull. Now, in my mind, again, everything being the number 9, digital root, the zodiac, and each stage of the zodiac being 2160, and there's been 12 stages. The stage of the bull will put, say, in my assumption, the thoughts around the construction of the pyramids somewhere around 6,000 years ago, right? If we're looking at the zodiac. However, the Sphinx, which is a lioness, we're talking about 12,000 years ago now, if I'm going off the same thought process, right? Just any thoughts or clarity around that connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So the direction, if you go back to 12,000 years ago, it's about 11,600 to 11,900 or so years ago. At that point in time, and this is the work that was done by Robert Bauval, that basically showed that the belt of Orion is exactly the positions of the 3 pyramids in the Giza complex, right? So this Great Pyramid, or Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Those 3 pyramids are like the 3 stars of the belt of Orion. Now, not as we see it in the sky today, but as it was about the same almost 12,000 years ago, right? Or, some would say as long as 13,000 years ago. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, right, you have to look at what position Leo was in and where the pointing. Now, the Bull Mountain is on the north face of the Great Pyramid. So if you look at the north side of the Great Pyramid, where the entrance is, right, that wall where we have the chevrons and everything, that would be exactly the position of Taurus. Time where, call it 12, 13,000 years ago, where the Sphinx was pointing into the night sky. So you could look at this like a clock. It wasn't that this was the Taurian age. The Taurian age would have been about 4,400, I think, BC to 2,100, 200 BC, and then after Taurus, was Aries, right? After Aries, Pisces, and then after Pisces, is Aquarius, which of course the precession works backwards, right? It goes backwards compared to how we think about the timeline, cycle signs, right? So, you know, you can look at that precessional period and say, well, geez, you know, during the time of Taurus, that was like a big deal, because when Moses came along, which was kind of at the beginning of the next cycle, which would have been the Aries cycle, the people wanted to worship the golden calf, right? Remember the symbology of the golden calf?
Gold.
Well, we all saw it in the Cecil B. DeMille movie if you saw the Ten Commandments. Well, basically, what Moses was trying to teach everybody was that we were no longer in the Taurian age, right? Because that's why all the symbology was lamb's blood. Put lamb's blood on the door at Pesach or Passover. Symbology during Isaiah's time frame, which is also during that 2,160-year period, was all about the blood of the lamb, right? And so everything was about the ram or the lamb, right? Lions laying with lambs, is writing.
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus comes, it's no longer about no longer about any of that, because now the Piscean age had started. And so he says, I'm going to make you fishermen of men, right? And it's all about the fish, and even the fish, right? He was a fisherman, or the followers that he had were fishermen from the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
And he himself was a carpenter, but fishing was a big part of their lives. So he gave the loaves and the fishes, right? So the symbology of fish was... Now, if you think about it, not only is the sign that we are in having a big impact on us, but the opposite sign on the zodiac also has a big impact on the world around us. So it becomes the shadow, right, versus the reflection, the absorption versus reflection. So what's the opposite sign of Pisces? It was the Virgin, Virgo. So the Virgin Mary was behind the scenes on everything, right? Even the Catholic Church worshiped Virgin Mary. Virginity was something that was very, very important during, you know, the last couple thousand years. And we like to shame people, right? If they weren't virgin, if they weren't, you know, chaste, as it were. So basically now we're going into the age of Aquarius, which is the age of the water bearer. But what's the opposite sign of Aquarius? It's Leo. So the symbology that we're going to be seeing behind everything now are lions and gold, right? Remember when Cecil the lion was killed? I remember thinking, oh, wow, that's kind of a big deal, because the lion is in the consciousness right now. It's in the subconsciousness, right? The consciousness is about the water bearer, right?
Yeah.
So all of these things, I think, play a role. I believe that the pyramid is at least, you know, in that 13,000-year-old range, that it was placed there like a clock, and that our understanding of time may not be what we believe in this linear context. So if we're living in cycles and toroidal aspects of time, maybe we need to start thinking about it differently. In such a construct, in such a theory, it would not be crazy to think that a photon, if fired into the edge of the universe, would not potentially loop back on itself like a boomerang eventually, right? Photon doesn't travel. It's the wave perturbation of energy that's doing the traveling. So it comes back and loops back on us. What if the future that we perceive is actually our distant past?
And see, this is the thinking, and just before I go into that, actually, the story of Osiris and Horus is also baking in this numerology and this Passover as well. Because Osiris chopped up 14 pieces, 14 pieces fell into the river, consumed by the fish, which then became the symbol for the Jesus fish. But that's also a symbol of reincarnation, and as the numerology behind it is very telling of the story as well. But just on what it is that you're saying there in relation to the, hold on. Sorry, Roach, got this cutting this call off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. So, who do you think made the pyramids?
Okay, well...
So let's get to the subject of Atlantis, and then who maybe later occupied, because this is all the stuff that was going on in my head. Just to bring people up to speed, not only did myself and Robert tour the pyramids There's so many more pyramids in Egypt than are discussed publicly. It was plethora of temple. It was an amazing, amazing, amazing experience. Definitely a huge tick on the bucket list. And when we actually had the Giza Plateau for, was it 8 hours? We had it to ourselves for?
Yeah, we had it pretty much all night, and then I had it again. You know, I spent 5 nights in the pyramid now.
That's insane. That's absolutely insane.
So, and I tell you, there's something special about that place, and I can't. There's definitely something special about it. But to answer your question, you know, how old is the pyramid and who built the pyramids? Anyone who says they know, they don't really know. But I tell you what I believe. I believe that there was an ancient civilization that was that covered the entire world. We could call it Atlanteans. You could get one of other names, but I believe that there was an ancient civilization that was very advanced. And that advanced civilization had the knowledge of very, very advanced mathematics, probably far beyond what we understand today. And I don't mean that as you know, a knock in any way on today's academic. I can tell you that
that's a very fair statement. It's very evident. We can't build these structures today, so
we can't build. I mean, come on, the Great Pyramid is 2.5 million stones in it. You know, each one of them is anywhere from 20 to, call it, 90 tons, and got, you know, the entire pyramid complex, which is regular the way that it's built, but it's perfectly symmetrical, is only off from its peak, right, by 1/4 of 1 inch. I mean, that's kind of insane. It's been through thousands of earthquakes. And anyone who says, oh, we could build that, I would say, okay, go for it. Go build one. Go make that happen. Because I don't see how it can be done. I really don't see how it could be done in the time frame that would matter if it really is meant to be some burial place. Now, really build something. And I don't believe this story that was built in 20 years, right? Because I did the math on that. If that were true, then it's something like a stone has to be placed perfectly in position like every minute of every day, hours of the day. So that's possible, right? I really do not. But the fact is that we could not build this building today. We really could not. And to me, the fact that it's also built exactly on the latitude that is precisely, you know, 29.9792458, which is exactly the speed of light. The word pyramid means pyra, which is fire,
in the middle,
and middle, right? These are 2 Greek words. And it is built exactly on the latitude of the speed of light. Now, we didn't even have latitude at that point. So how could it have been built exactly on that? And fire is a word that's synonymous with light. It also means hydrogen. So pyramid. Now, I then looked at it and said, well, what about the longitude? Is the longitude also a reference to light speed? Well, actually it is. So the longitude is 31.1342 degrees. Now that 31.1342, if you divide it into the 360 degrees of a circle, that'll come out to 0.0864. Same 864 of the sun being 864,000 miles in diameter. The same 864 as the number of seconds. So on one side, the latitude, it is referencing light speed in meters per second. On the other side, it is referencing our time measurement system in 1 day. And not only is it only referencing the time measurement system in 1 day, but it's also the mile measurement for light speed minus the 1 in front. So miles
is incredible.
1.864 times 10 to the 5th power miles per second. So take 1 off the front of that and you got 0.864, and now we have time. How in the heck did these pyramid builders do that? Or is that all just perfect coincidence?
Can't be. So yeah. I mean, from,
I'm like,
I guess the last 6,
I just laugh when I hear people from academia go, no, that's just coincidence. You know, it's like, yeah, okay. You keep believing that, bro. So that whoever the builders were, Atlanteans or someone else or some other very advanced ancient culture, they were so far ahead of our understanding on architecture and geometry. Found every one of our current measurement systems are embedded within the Great Pyramid. Every one. The foot, meter, cubit, and inch. Now in 2018, I discovered the Alpha Omega on the rim of the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid. And I had invited Nassim to come with me. And I said, man, you got to come with me. I'm going to discover something. I know I'm going to discover something. And he's like, oh, I really would love to come, but I can't come. I can't come. I brought 12 other friends with me. And I'm in the pyramid, and all week I've been drawing in my notebook Alpha Omega. First night I'm in the pyramid, I look down on the rim and I see an Alpha Omega pressed right into the rose granite. Now, funny thing is, I grabbed Muhammad, Ibrahim, and also Zach. They're both Egyptologists and hieroglyphics experts. And I said, have you guys seen this before? And they're like, did you just make that? And I'm like, yeah, I chipped it out just now. Come on, perfectly. The markings were 5.6 inches wide. Exactly. They were exactly 33 inches from the far corner of the sarcophagus, right? Out of the total of 89.62 the sarcophagus. Now, the 5.6 inch in diameter was important because right at the center of those two letters from the edge of the sarcophagus is 31.416 inches. And guess what the perimeter of the king's chamber is? Exactly 31.416 meters. 60 cubits.
So the level of engineering.
Yeah, come on.
When you factor all the different dimensions of it, it's insane.
Is 1.718 feet. Now that 1.718 is Euler minus 1. That's a mathematical constant. So if I spring and I put a pendulum on it of 1 meter, exactly 1 meter in length, and I swing that pendulum exactly, you know, pi over 6, which is 30 degrees, right? Pi over 6, which is 30 degrees. The length of the swing of that pendulum will be exactly 1.718 feet. And it will take exactly 1 second for the pendulum to swing each direction, back and forth. Now, this is perfect. It's not almost, it's not maybe, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Again, a 1 meter long pendulum string, exactly 1 meter.
So what do you think? What do you think the original build? Because I think there's two different stages to this of a relatively advanced civilizations that occupied the pyramids. You had the builder race, right, and then you had, I guess, the pharaohs in Egyptian and Egyptology, who I believe populated the pyramids like 6,000-ish years ago. And this is where the elitism aspect of what these symbols became to mean in our modern society, which I don't feel is an accurate depiction. It's definitely not the energy and the vibe that I got while being there, that this is a symbol of elitism. It's the vibe very much I got there, that this is a place of very high vibration, initiation, and as a way of getting connected with source. So I guess my question to you is what do you think they were originally used for? Why were these? Because these are everywhere. There's thousands of pyramids all around the world. What did they use them for?
So let me just say this. First of all, that 5.6 inch reference I made to the width of the Alpha Omega, right? That is also, if I square that value, 31.4, right? 31.416. That's pi times 10. So the 5.6, it's actually 5.605 inches squared, is the square root of the perimeter of the room in meters. Now, how the heck, right, is it that perfect? So what was, first of all, a lot of people believe, and I'm sorry to those people, but I just don't believe this in one at all. And that is that this was some power plant. Power may have been an outcome of the pyramids, these residents. It may have been an unintended outcome, or it might have even been utilized. But the purpose of the Great Pyramid, in my opinion, is all about ascension and all about consciousness and about communication with the universe and with your higher self. That is the purpose of the Great Pyramid. And what we were able to find on this last trip kind of said, okay, come with me, we're going to discover stuff. Well, the last night that we were there, and you can find a lot of it on my Instagram page, and it was funny because I had representatives from like TV stations like History Channel and Nat Geo, et cetera, called me up and they're like, hey, for your trip, we want to basically have all this recorded so that we can televise all of this. And I said no, because, you know, I want to make sure that this gets presented the way that it should be presented. And it's sort of, bizarre thing. It needs to be presented as exactly as it is, which is mankind remembering what mankind is and who. So I'm working on a film on this, and I actually asked my followers on Instagram what I should. The same thing happened. Someone tried to call me.
All right.
So I came back pretty good to do this myself, right? And that's what we're doing. So basically what I believe the purpose of the pyramid is to awaken us, to bring us to a higher level of consciousness. And Da Vinci wrote about this. He wrote about it in several places in a letter that he wrote, and it's undisputed to have been written in his hand, to the Sultan, to the Devatdar of the Sultan of Brunei. So he worked for the Sultan, not Brunei, sorry, the Sultan of Cairo. I don't know, I was thinking of Brunei. The Sultan of Cairo, Babylon is what it's written as. And he says this is not the Babylon shores of the River Chober, but rather the Babylon that is next to Cairo. In fact, the two are but one and not two cities, he writes. He then talks about his journey there. He says that I arrived finally in Cairo. So this is in the hand of Da Vinci. Now, art historians believe that because there's no record of Da Vinci going to Egypt, they thought this was some sort of fictional account. They never connected the notion that for 4 years of Da Vinci's life, from 1482 until 1486, there's no record of his life. And that's the time period that he went to Egypt. And the first piece of art that he finished after coming back from Egypt was the Vitruvian Man. And the first record of that showing up was in 1487. So we went to Egypt looking for a Da Vinci Code. And I advertised it as such and told everybody that that's what exactly we were doing. Yeah. And that's exactly what we did do. In fact, we found that the Last Supper painting is an encryption for the King's Chamber. Now, Da Vinci, even in the same letter to the Devatdar, the Sultan of Cairo, mentions going to the Bull Mountain. Now, you mentioned Rosicrucians at the beginning of the call. Why do Rosicrucians call themselves Rosy Cross members? Why the Rose Cross? Well, the original name of the Giza Plateau was never Giza. Anciently, it was always referred to as the Ras Tau. And Tau is a cross, the Rose Cross. In fact, the King's Chamber is all made of this gray granite, except for the sarcophagus itself, which is
rose quartz.
Yeah, rose, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's rose quartz with rose granite, right? And because quartz grows into the granite. Now, what's interesting about these residence chambers made of granite, so the pyramid is largely made of limestone, except for in the chambers, right? Like the King's Chamber, where it is absolutely granite. Now, did you know that the speed of sound as it travels through air travels 343 meters, right, per second? That's about 740 miles per hour, right? That's the speed of sound in air. But it travels 6,000 meters per second through granite.
Wow.
So sound propagates much, much faster through granite. That's the fastest you will find sound traveling.
Yeah.
Okay? Because sound goes more rapidly through a thicker and denser medium, whereas light stops, right? But maybe it's just an incorrect way of how we look at light and its separation from sound. light and sound are the same thing. Light and gravity are actually two opposite conditions of the same thing too. But the point is that these are advanced resonance chambers. And these chambers, because of their inherent characteristics, sound acts differently in these chambers. And when you lay in the sarcophagus and you find the right resonance frequency, which turns out to be approximately 117 hertz, and basically you find that right frequency, it starts to go like this. Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 whoa. You remember that?
Yeah,
Find
it's
that
insane.
right
It is so powerful.
and it's
So powerful.
loud. And I looked up, while I was laying in there, and I could see electromagnetic waves going across my entire body. In fact, I got it on film when my wife and others were laying inside the chamber. They just asked us not to show these videos, right? And because then they may not let me go back in. And I don't want to get in trouble like that. I've been there many times. They actually gave me a key to the pyramid last time. It was pretty cool. But the point is that these chambers somehow bring us, I believe, to a higher level of consciousness. And that once you find that exact resonance, then something changes in you.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in 2017, the first time I did it. I noticed it again in 2018 when I was there for 2 nights. And then this last trip right before COVID. And literally, we made it back in barely time. I mean,
just in time.
The Sim was very concerned. He's like, look, I don't want you guys to go because what happens if you get stuck because of the quarantine? And I said, look, I don't know why, but I just know we're going to go and we're going to make it. We're going to come back in time. And literally, we made it back with like 1 or 2 days to spare. I mean, it was that close.
Yeah.
So, and we had an amazing time. And sure enough, we discovered about 8 new stone reliefs inside the King's Chamber on the last night. Unfortunately, that's the night you weren't with us, Michael. But we had more time because I wasn't worried about all the other people on the trip then. I stayed an extra night with a small group of about 10 people. And we discovered things that were hidden inside the Last Supper painting, but we found inside the Last Supper painting on the exact walls in the exact same position inside the King's Chamber, which has the same proportionality of that room as well.
The bull, right?
The bull and the cow, right? So the Apis bull inside its mother, the Hathor,
Yeah.
which are represented in Egypt mythology as the Alpha and the Omega. There was also an Eye of Ra on the back wall, exactly in the same position above Jesus' head in the Last Supper,
Yeah.
right? And many, many other things we found as well. And we're putting all of this.
Just on that point, Robert, we spoke earlier about consciousness, effectively law of attraction. We spoke about as well how quickly it can work and snap into place for you, right? And we also spoke on raising our collective consciousness, right? So with what's been happening in recent years, let's say the last 4 years in particular, right? I feel it's been a very significant time on this planet where consciousness vibration has been rising. In Egypt, these things were appearing on this painting, right, that none of us has seen before. Okay. And we spoke about time quite a bit on this conversation as well. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is are we on the cusp of shifting our collective timeline, right, where information from a different dimensionality is starting to come through into this timeline as we're adjusting? And if you do feel like we are shifting timeline by raising our vibration, do you think we're heading towards a more positive timeline?
So first of all, I think that solely depends on our perception. I mean that.
Mm.
I think that we are here to learn to fall in love with here. And that once we fall in love with here, in the same way that we, and it doesn't mean that we can't make changes to systems and everything. Of course we can. And in fact, that's where I want to put my focus. It's not about the polarity of how human beings are, you know, that there's always going to be half the population will be conservative and half the population will be, you know, liberal, quote unquote. I think that systems right now are clearly broken and they no longer serve, right? They no longer serve us. But the people are all just seeing the world from their own perspective. And those perspectives are limited, right? I often use this analogy of a cylinder, right? If I hold a cylinder right on far to you, you'll see the cylinder as a circle. And if it were casting a shadow on the wall behind me, you would only see a circular shadow, right?
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
hold it sideways, you would look at the shadow and say, oh, it's a rectangle. But I have the higher knowledge holding the cylinder to know that, oh, wait, it's actually 3 dimensions and it's a cylinder.
Yeah.
Okay. The truth is, truth has many facets, right? We have this term in the United States, e pluribus unum, right? So, you know, it's basically from many though into one, right? So many into one. It's talking about uniting. But the other side of that is another Latin term that I just looked up before starting this call, and I wasn't thinking about it on this to use on this call, but it's omnia ab uno, which is the exact opposite. So from one, many.
Yeah.
And it goes both directions, just like breathing, inhaling, and exhaling.
Yeah. Expansion, contraction, everything, expansion, contraction.
We tend to look at and believe that our perspective is the only truth. We need to understand that one perspective might be true, but it's not the whole truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like time itself. You know, we look at up until the 15th century, a lot of people thought that, you know, the earth was flat. But yet we know that in ancient times
There's still a few remaining.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. I mean, look, we talk about how could people be more advanced in the past than they were today. Well, lots of people were more advanced. Thales understood the world was round, right? He understood it right away. You had most of the polymaths that understood the world was round thousands of years before people thought it was flat at the time that Columbus sailed to America. So, I mean, there's a perfect example of consciousness forgetting, right? Forgetting itself, forgetting its own power, forgetting its divinity as well. And so we think about time, and the reason why we would think that the earth was flat is I look at it, you know, it's just like those guys I watched on this show called Bending the Curve on Netflix, which is worth watching, by the way. But, you know, they were like setting up lasers, trying to set them up so they could show that the curvature of the earth wasn't there and that it's actually just flat and we're in some big parking lot with a dome, right? Well, the thing is that if you only lived in one place your whole life and you never traveled, you never got on an airplane, and you never flew west around the entire world and then ended up coming back home from the eastern side, like I have many times, or if you had never flown over the South Pole, which, by the way, there's this whole conspiracy about South Pole. I have flown over the South Pole. I have flown over the South Pole. I flew over the South Pole from Tierra del Fuego to Australia when I lived in Australia. And the pilot's like, there's the South Pole right there. Dude, I didn't see a big giant hole. Okay, but all I'm saying is that if you don't have that perspective, you can't know. You simply can't know. So what if our lifetimes are just too short to be able to see, just as our vision, if you don't get in an airplane, you can't see the curvature of the earth, right? Unless you get really, really high up on a mountain somewhere. You can't see the curvature of the earth. What if our lifetimes in time are analogous to that? We live for 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 years if we're lucky. And we don't live long enough to see the curve of time. So that starts to make me question, right? Okay, when people look at this, they would say, well, usually the children are much smarter than the parents. That's the arrogance that we all get. I think in this case, we are, as Graham Hancock says, we are a species with amnesia.
Totally.
Forgotten who we are. We've forgotten what we can do. And so when you think of it in that context, you know, what is the purpose of the Great Pyramid, it is there to help jog our memory.
Totally.
And it is a giant encryption standing through the test of time in stone. Its proportions are all perfect. It is perfectly mathematical to a degree we could never have understood today. And all of this was embedded inside the works of Leonardo da Vinci. Here he says in his writing, I was studying Bull Mountain. Taurus Mountain is what he referred to it as, Taurus Mountain. Well, Ros Tau is Taurus backwards. The Greek spelling for Taurus is Tauros.
Yeah.
Tau Ros.
Yeah.
Ros Tau. So people didn't understand it. He even talks about going into the king's chamber. And he said, oh, I was excited to go in there. He even explains in detail how he has to like hunch over because the height of the corridor into the king's chamber is only 39.5 inches. And so it's kind of like the height of a bar that you would put a beer on, right? So you have to hunch over and you put your hands on your knees going back and forth. He describes that in abject detail.
Yeah. You would only know that, especially back then, if you experienced it.
That's right. And so the things that he put into his paintings, and I believe it's not only The Last Supper, it's all of his paintings that were made after 1486, including La Belle Ferronnière, which also we found the Eye of Horus embedded with that, and also the face of a lion man hidden in that. There is a massive, beautiful, incredible story that is emerging out of all of this that I'm very excited about. And I think it will help to raise consciousness as we start to ask more and more questions. And we have to start to challenge notions that we have so long depended on. And that's okay. And we might feel a little bit crazy in the process. That's okay too. It's all part of the change happening in the world today.
Totally. Just to quickly sum up then, Robert, I'm sure people are curious as well, and I've got a little bit more of insight on this than perhaps your audience does. How is your work applying to products, technology that your everyday individual, say, on the street will be affected by? Because this is a thing that I really like about yourself, people like Nassim, Adam. It's not that, because it's so easy to be consumed by just the academic side to all of this and the intellectual side to all of this and just get really engulfed in it. But I personally feel it takes a different caliber of individual to actually make this practical, right? And where it affects and it helps other people. So just some of the technology that you're just working with and you're surrounded by, and how you see this type of thinking making its way towards technology.
So one of the things that the week after I found the Alpha Omega in the pyramid in 2018 on May 7th, I discovered a new type of number called a Quasi-Prime. And these are numbers that are products of two prime numbers. And so I published a paper on it. And it was actually Adam Apollo who, when he saw it, that I posted it on my Instagram, he said, oh man, dude, you may have encryption. And I said, how? I didn't know that because I don't know much about encryption. And he said, well, encryption all depends on prime factorization. And now because you discovered the quasi-prime numbers, you should be able to predict primes infinitely. And sure enough, we could predict primes, absolutely. And we did do that. We took it all the way out and accurately predicted every prime on supercomputer all the way up to 2 times 10 to the 63rd power. So, I mean, you could keep going. That was already enough data, though. We knew that it was infinite, and it was never wrong. It was never wrong. So we could predict primes infinitely. Well, what that also led to was the need to see if it's true that you could factorize. So, you have a number like 35. That is a public key encryption. That'd be a very small public key encryption. And all money around the planet today and all secrets, everything is based on a number like 35, which is a quasi-product of two prime numbers. The equation of encryption is a very simple equation. It's A times B equals C. It's actually that simple. Now, most people, even when I talk to people that are, experts in security, if they're not cryptographers, they don't know that that's really the equation that is what the discrete logarithm is dependent upon. So A times B equals C. So C is the public key, and it's publicly announced. It's everywhere people can access it. Now, when you've got a much, much longer number, it's very difficult to find the 2 prime factors. But for 35, it's easy. 5 times 7, because we memorized that. That's very simple. And by the way, there's only 2 numbers that can be used to multiply by each other to create that number. There's no other whole number that would multiply together to create the number 35. And the same is true for encryption. So the only way that it can be found is through a massive trial and error test.
Yeah.
And the trial and error test takes exponential time to find the larger the number is. So if you have a 256-bit encryption, it will be 2 to the power of 256. 2 to the power of 256 is the number of calculations you have to perform to land on the 2 prime factor. If it's 2048-bit encryption, it's 2 to the power of 2048. If it's 46, it's 2 to the power of 4096. So you can imagine as those numbers get larger and larger, it becomes harder and harder to crack. Until and unless there's a geometric proof. Now, we found 12 ways of decrypting, and all of them were very successful based on the knowledge that we had related to quasi-primes and prime numbers. Some were faster, some were slower. But in general, all of them worked. Now, recently, we found one which uses something called reciprocal wave. And reciprocal wave means that we simply take the 1 over x value, reciprocal value of the public key, to find its prime factors. And lo and behold, we found that the prime factors show up in the 1 over x string a predictable number of times all through the entire string. So we thought, gee, that's not cool because dangerous, right? Because now anyone can just take a 1 over x of a public key encryption and factorize it.
Yeah.
Well, we also found that geometrically, there's a means to do it. I posted it on my Instagram as well. And the geometric means is to simply take a number value, that is the public key, make it an area, turn that into a triangle and turn it into a square, rotate the triangle and square it to 12 points, and where those triangles and squares overlap will give you the mean value area of a circle.
Yeah.
And that mean value area is used to then take the square root of that, and it gives you the mean of the 2 prime factors. And then you subtract the actual public key from the mean square of those 2 prime factors, and you'll end up with a differential, and that differential you take the square root of. And those 2 give you the distance between the primes and the mean of the primes. So you start from the mean, you add the distance between the 2, and subtract the distance, and you've got the 2 answers, you're done.
That blew my mind when you showed it to me, because obviously it's very hyper sophisticated, but the execution is almost to a point of not being able to believe just how simple it is. And again, you take that thinking, and I look at the pyramid as a monolithic monument, and I think, how was that made? But then in its simplicity, it's a triangle, right? And it's very similar to, I think this is also part of the challenge with mainstream academia as well, is it's almost got to a point where hyper-focus works against us. And I mean that in the segregation of all the different sciences and all the different degrees that you can do, everything is channeling you to actually lose sight of the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And it makes it almost nigh impossible to even consider these other avenues where individuals such as yourself, who weren't possibly like looking at things that were trained in that way, are now making huge mathematical breakthroughs because you're unifying that connection, right?
Well, interesting. You mentioned,
there's something you said that stuck with me pretty much the first time I met you, Robert. You said that you predict in best part of 10 years, unless you know music, you wouldn't be able to call yourself a mathematician.
Right.
And I've really seen that in your work, and the simplicity of it that really comes through. And I think it brings a lot more audience to mathematics as well, who otherwise never would have been engaged in looking at numbers or having a relationship with numbers, and not even realizing that it affects that person looking back at you in the mirror.
Back in the mirror. And that's what it always comes back to, right? I mean, you started off the discussion about Da Vinci.
Yeah.
And one of the favorite quotes that I have from Da Vinci is, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I could not agree more with that. If it's not simple, it's not right. You know, we have lots of complex problems in the world today, and we somehow get stuck in this hyper-specialized way of thinking that the only solution to a hyper-complex problem is more hyper-complexity. When actually, that's anathema. The truth is, only the simplest solution can solve the most complex problems.
Totally.
And I think as the world today, you know, one of the big issues that you were asking about, you know, how does this come down to the world today? What we're now seeing is that the entire basis of money is founded on false principle.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? Well, in 1973, it used to be that all money was backed by precious metal. So we have pound sterling and we had gold at Fort Knox.
Mm-hmm.
In 1973, Richard Nixon decided to get rid of the gold standard.
Yeah,
so as I look at all the things of systems that are broken in society today, the most fundamental is the lifeblood that serves all of the system, right, of our world, and that is the money system today. And since Nixon got rid of it, what's happened is the only backing for money that exists today is the encryption itself. There is no other backing for money. So we have, unless you want to go into by fiat, right, sovereign nation by fiat, to say, well, guess what? This is what we say the value is because our military is stronger than yours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you think about it, why was gold chosen as a backing for currency, or silver or precious metal? Well, you know, first of all, it doesn't burn. You can keep it. You might be able to melt it, but it's not going to go anywhere. And most importantly, if I have a bunch of gold in my castle and someone wants to come along and steal my gold, he better bring like a whole army with him. And he better have some way of transporting that gold somewhere else. Because otherwise, he might only be able to take as much gold as he himself weighs.
Yeah. Yeah.
He can't carry more than a man's weight in gold.
Yeah.
And if he is, he's not going to be very fast in his escape, right? So that's why gold was, as a practical matter, a good way to back currency. Well, today, it's only an encryption that backs your currency. Because I don't have to worry about, I can come in like a hacker can, right? And I can go into everyone's bank account, or anyone can, and if they have the way to break the encryption, which is a public key, which now is simply the subject of factorization of two private keys that can use a geometric method or a reciprocal wave factorization, decryption methodology. I don't need to worry about carrying anything. It doesn't weigh anything. I'm just going to take it off of one ledger and put it onto mine, right? Now, that means that currency has no value. It literally has no value other than what everyone believes and will accept it for. We have just increased in the United States and around the world, the amount of debt has gone way up because the game has become, how do we win elections? Well, we make sure the economy is relatively stable. Well, what if there's no underlying reason the economy should be strong, especially during COVID? Well, let's increase liquidity. The way we increase liquidity as nation states is to, and this is why ultimately the euro fails, right? The reason we can increase liquidity in the United States is because we'll say, okay, we're going to print a bunch of money. We call this monetary policy. We do it by lowering interest rates, which is the price of money, and then we flood the markets full of money, full of cash, right? Well, the problem is that every country wants to play that game because the lower your price of money, the more your currency devalues vis-a-vis other currencies. So China's been game for a long time.
It's even more insidious than this, Robert, because what you're touching on here is now very personal to my heart, and obviously what I'm doing in my professional career with BitStocks and building a bank on top of Bitcoin, because money is a token of time, right? And the way that we define that time and value that time is based on our skill sets as a human being and the labor it takes to perform the skill set. So it's really skill divided by time, and then you've got your salaries, you've got your whole monetary system based off that, right? I'll rather buy a piece of furniture than make it myself, right? So when you have government's ability to distort the value of what nations price their citizens' time in, that really is where the economic slavery subject needs to be contained in, right? Because you print money, that new money must derive its value from somewhere, which is the pre-existing money supply. So every single year you go to the supermarket, bread and eggs is more expensive, but you speak to a farmer, you ask him what you're doing differently, that person's not doing anything different in his life. It is the unit in which those goods and services are being priced against. And it's a really nice thing to really wrap this whole conversation up and tie it all in, because with what you're doing with encryption work, right, which is what very much got my attention and why I jumped on a plane straight away and I flew to Vegas to see your presentation on your encryption, because it has huge ramifications for the monetary system as a whole, encryption period as a whole, but also with what I'm working very closely with, which is Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which pride themselves on being secured through cryptography, right? But the aspect to Bitcoin that I'm most interested in is the fact that off the back of a conversation like this, I can also explain Bitcoin more in this way, is that the blockchain and the way the blockchain works is that it writes forward and it reads backwards, right? So you've got the initial genesis, and then you've got the timeline carrying on, and all you can do is you exist in the present, you write forward, and you read backwards, right? And as a template and as planetary memory, a way to document human existence and actually have our digital restoration of the Akashic records, this is really the realm it is that we're entering. And if we're going to have, say, our history digitized and curatable and accessible through an API for all of time, the encryption as to what secures our history is so important that if we do spark this new, say, fourth industrial revolution and we become highly automated and we start really integrating our systems with machines, and also we're talking about transhumanism as well. Elon Musk is doing pretty impressive work with Neuralink and everything they're doing there. Whether I agree with it or not is different, but in terms of the technological feat, it's really impressive. And I anticipated this stuff years ago. I said that we're going to enter a world that we have an infinite recording tape, which is Bitcoin. We're going to have technologies that will allow you to back up your memory, like from this lifetime, and you can download it into an Android, or you can download it into another vessel. All of these things are not far away in terms of where we are technologically. What's going to be increasingly important is that we as a global collective have sovereignty over our data.
Oh yeah. So let me touch on that one. So when I realized that encryptions could be cracked, I realized quickly that there needed to be a new type of encryption. And I have papers right now on the cracking side of it that are going through peer review at major universities and major journals in the cryptography field, and I'm very excited about that. And but I wanted to create a new encryption, and so the new encryption utilizes something called a one-time pad. It's the only digital one-time pad technology that is workable. And if you look up one-time pad on Wikipedia, you'll find that it has certain characteristics and conditions around it. One is that the number has to be as long as the message. So that's kind of impractical because you've got a 1 gig message you want to send and you have to have a 1 gig key. Well, that's no longer true. We solved the means to do that using irrational numbers, so the keys can be very, very short and be compressed using nature's compression. You know, you have a number like the square root of 3, it's an infinite value. All you have to have is the square root of 3 to be able to unlock that one-time pad value. It's not by equation. It's not like a discrete logarithm. It's the only uncrackable encryption that there is. So that is what we have developed. It's called Time AI. It's also called Crown Encrypt OTP at one of my companies. But I believe that ultimately, the extension of our digital lives, whether you believe in transhumanism or not, I'm not exactly there, even though one of the products that, that I am developing right now is a intraocular lens that will be just like an iPhone, right? It goes inside your eye. And I hope to get, you know, some meetings with some of the major companies here pretty soon on that topic, because it's an interesting discussion to have at the very least, right? We can go into whole discussions about, is that right? Is that not right? I watched a pretty disturbing thing on AI this morning, which kind of got me freaked out a little bit. But no matter what you believe, the importance level of your encryption being a totally secure means for you, even down to your DNA level. And I just filed patents last week on encrypting DNA so that somebody cannot clone you. I know that sounds crazy, but
it's not crazy. The crazy thing is that statement is not crazy.
Yeah, I know. So, you know, it sounded crazy when I put it forward to the patent guys that do this type of stuff for me, but then after a little while, they were like, wow, that's really not crazy, right? So, you know, I believe that we need to have a really outstanding encryption. And that's what we have worked to put forward. And I'm doing something very exciting about it. You guys will be hearing about in the course of the next several weeks. I can't really talk about right now, but stay tuned on that topic, because you'll be hearing more about this just in the course of the next month or so at the very latest. So I believe, though, look at society, bringing back to the macro view for just a moment. You started with a very provocative question, looking in the mirror. What are the systems that we have today that don't serve us? The education system does not serve us. And strangely, COVID is helping to change that. Okay, I even basically put forward today or yesterday, I made a new domain, which is wisdom.school.com, which is going to be, and I want it to be a free platform for people to be able to use. I think this is something I'm very passionate about. I have small children. The way we teach education to go into these hyper specialized categorizations very early in life, I think, is a terrible travesty. And it doesn't make sense to me, because then you can't see how everything's connected, right? We have made this world so separate based on scarcity and time, right? Which actually the world, if we perceive it differently, can be totally abundant. And it can be something that we really enjoy and love. It doesn't have to always be a zero-sum game. You win, I lose, or vice versa. And I think children need to learn that from a very early age. Children can learn that from an early age. And you know, the pathway very often to higher understanding of mathematics is, as you said, through music. It's through art. Higher understanding in physics is also through music and art. And I fundamentally believe that. So I think that's one area that's broken. So we live in a society today where the education system is totally broken, and yet people are more interested in math and physics than they've ever been. I never would have thought that I would be sitting here with, you know, on my combined platforms, 250,000 followers now. I never would have thought. I only started this a year and a half ago, putting it onto, you know, social media. And it's because it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with consciousness raising, where people are immediately attracted because somehow, some way, they know they're missing something.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a form of communication. So that's education. The other side of it is that we live in a world today where people are so spiritual and craving greater spirituality and connectedness, and yet the church attendance is at all-time lows.
Yeah.
Right? We live in a world today in society where everyone's craving community, But we've been divided and conquered, and we're all stuck in quarantine, and very few people are interested at all in participating in government. So we have these three aspects of society, the university systems, and I participated. I went to Harvard Business School. I did all this stuff too. But we look at the societal norms that have been created. What is the consensus opinion becomes morality. And what's happened, if you look at it, is we have the religious structures, we have the large organizations, we also have the government, which tells us what is lawful and what is unlawful. We have religions that tell us what is moral and what is immoral or amoral. And we have education structures at universities that tell us what we can and what we can't study, what we're allowed to talk about, what is truthful and what is not truthful from an academic perspective. I think mankind is ready to graduate beyond these three types of structures. That we are ready to move on, and I believe that the monetary system has to be something that cannot be so easily manipulated by government. I think borders are going to be changing.
Totally.
I think it's already happening. I have people that follow me in Iran, and you know they can't come here and I can't go there, but they somehow are vibing with the same philosophical viewpoint on the world. I think that is the thing, you know, an idea. There's nothing more powerful. No army can resist the power of an idea whose time has come.
Sorry.
Ideas can't be broken, right? That's by Victor Hugo. You cannot break an idea out of people. It may seem like it's just a stupid little idea, but ideas are what changes the world.
100%.
And our perception of the world around us is just how we observe the universe differently, the U-inverse. One could say that we are the universe observing itself, and we're all one. Omnia ab uno.
Totally, I think
it goes both directions, right? Balanced interchange. And
dude, that's
about love and acceptance. You know, the world is not a tough place, Michael, because people don't like each other. The world is a tough place because people don't like themselves.
so powerful, so powerful. And I do feel like, at least with certainly with people that I'm connected with, resonating with, and I don't know if it's a question of my own circle, but it seemed like it might have been that in the past, but now it just seems like a very much global movement where people are starting to explore inner space, right? Whereas before everything's about outspace, 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 but now very much, and I can see it as we've been speaking for the last couple of hours in the chat box, just the vibe of the people in the chat box, you can tell it's a bunch of people who are on the journey of inner space, and getting a deeper connection with themselves. And it's a beautiful thing. It makes us all realize that through traveling internally, we are all connected. And I like to leave on my favorite quote from Thoth, and I think it ties this conversation in together, as it has really very much been a conversation of time. And so Thoth, priest king, Atlantean priest king, time changes not, but all things change in time. For time is the force that holds events separate, each in its own proper place, and your consciousness moves through time as you move from one event to another. And that's a quote for me that's like resonated with me for the years that I've been studying Thoth and the Emerald Tablets. And I think it's very much been the theme of this conversation as well. And we really are infinite, and we're on a journey of rediscovery and remembering our divinity. And work like yours, Robert, has definitely helped raise my vibration, and will continue to keep on helping raise my vibration. And clearly, so many people. This has been, I've actually been trying to keep an eye on the chat box as well as we've been going, because I know it's quite an intense comment, but I really have been trying to keep an eye on the chat box. You've got a great audience following you as well. So your message and your work is clearly being felt, because it's been a lovely chat box to see as we've been discussing things. Any last resounding words?
Yeah, let me end on a quote that I love. Right, Ralph Waldo Emerson was a polymath. and a famous poet in the United States. He's friends with Mark Twain and Walter Russell, in fact. They're both all three of them were members of the Twilight Club, along with Tom Watson, who was the founder of IBM, and several other notables at the time. You know, Walter was very close friends as well with Nikola Tesla. In fact, my office in New York City, I didn't know this when I got the office, was the office of Walter Russell in the 1930s.
That is a coincidence.
That was a coincidence and a half, let me tell you. And he also consulted in helping to design the building. He designed several hotels, the Hotel Pierre, Hotel des Arts, the Café des Artistes as well in New York were all Walter Russell designs as an architect. But Ralph Waldo Emerson said, if there were any one time one would desire to be born in, is it not the age of revolution? When old and new stand side by side and admit of being compared, when the energies of all men are searched by fear and by hope, and when the historic glories of the old can be compensated by the rich possibilities of the new era, this time, like all times, is a very good one, if we but know what to do with it.
Brilliant.
Journey inside is the greatest journey. It's the hero's journey. It's the journey into the you inverse. When you start to recognize that you're on this great journey to return to yourself, a journey to return to self-love, and a journey to return to self-acceptance for who you are, not for the masks that we put on, not for the way that we want to show the world that we are, but for the authentic self. And we can learn to accept and love that person. We will, by extension, learn to love and accept the world around us. And that is becoming the change that you want to see in the world.
Beautiful. Robert, love you, brother. Appreciate you, man. Godspeed. And until the next time, on a personal note, I've got to pop you over that email as well. And you need to send me the stuff that we spoke about the other night as well.
I'll get you that NDA too.
Brilliant. And to everyone who stayed locked in for 2 hours, we love you, appreciate you, and thank you. And you guys also have a responsibility of pushing out this vibration and helping others activate and resonate. Love and light. All the best.
See you later,
Take
man.
care, brother.
Bye.
See ya.